What's the optimal amount of minutes per day someone should spend on Twitter?
I think it'd be a really good rule that you can only spend as much time on Twitter as you spend meditating. But I'm nowhere near that. I'm lost. I'm far gone at this point. I don't know how you do what I do. I think if I were doing something completely different, I would cut myself off. But the truth is, what's going on now really matters to me.
America as a nation is just a set of cultural software that's miraculous. And what you write beautifully about is how the elites now have a coordinated conspiracy to attack that cultural software. That's something worth getting stressed about.
It is.
It's worth getting stressed about.
And why, it's important to actually speak out. I mean, there will be consequences, but you have to speak out. But I do think a lot of liberals just haven't absorbed sufficiently or don't want to, and I understand why they don't want to, that the philosophical foundations of this ideology are so corrosive to any idea of a functioning liberal democracy that if they are completely absorbed within an educational establishment, and not just a teaching of history, but a teaching of mathematics or teaching of these other, are all regarded as constructs of white supremacy itself.
Right.
I mean, do they understand that the people promoting this mean it and are in control of seems to be our entire education system? And then you have people telling me in the New York Times that this is not designed for high schools as they produced the 1619 project for distribution in high schools. And I was like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
Then they say, well, it's just a lens. I love this thing, a lens. And you're like, well, yes, it is just a lens, but if it's a lens through which you see everything, which it demands of you, then the whole concept of an individual learning, there being legitimate differences in how well people do in school, that what matters is the formation of that individual citizen, regardless of his or her identity of various sorts, then it's lost, and parents sense that it's lost.
Yeah, I mean, but it's the same people that are aggressively virtue signaling on social media about things like the black-white wealth gap that are then propagating changes to K through 12 curriculum that will rob young black kids of the skills they would need to acquire more wealth to close that gap, right? At a certain point, it's crazy making to see this shit everywhere, right?
Well, I think the other thing that people may not be taking fully into account is the attack on SATs and the attack on standards, alongside the epidemic in which parents saw that these teachers' unions really couldn't give a shit about their kids and controlled everything and kept they were also at their wits' end with the teachers.
It was crazy. I have an in-law who's a hardcore Biden, thinks that Kamala Harris is a beautiful, strong black woman. And she, maybe 9 months into the pandemic, they came over and she was inflamed about the teachers union. And I was like, you sound like a contributor to Newsmax. You sound like we're on One American News Network right now. It was like a red pill moment for the suburban wine moms. It was like, oh, wait a minute, this institution that I was told is a core part of the Democratic constituency might be self-serving and sort of cynical. It was like, boom. Trump made the Republicans, it was a much more powerful force for turning the GOP populist than a million Ross Douthat, Reihan Salam books, right? He actually made them become more populist, right? And if the ultimate effect, assuming that they can shake off the cult of personality, is in 2024, they're electing youngkin types, which is Ivy League, khaki, basketball dad, Trumpists, would that at all reduce some of your, hatred of him, in the sense that if over the long haul there's a consequence in which you can actually morph the GOP's policy platform to actually deal with the struggles of the people that are in the jam without the democracy-threatening lunacy, all right?
Yeah, I think that's the sweet spot of most Western politics right now.
Boris, yeah, exactly.
And it's a sort of right populist culturally and left populist economically.
Yeah.
And the key thing with the economics is, I think, addressing wealth inequality at the very top, taxing the rich a lot more, and doing some basic redistributing at the bottom to level people up, as the British Tories say. And the other thing is immigration, which is the other issue that actually historically has been part of the left populist position, but has become a right populist position. There are some fears of cultural transformation, racial transformation, which are in many ways, quote unquote, deplorable, but are also completely predictable and understandable and human, given the shifts that are going on. But people don't want to think anyone can just show up here and get in. And there's really no rule of law sifting the good ones from the bad ones, or the legal from the illegal. And Biden has sent a signal that more people will get away with it if they show up. And we're not doing anything about it interior. And we're just treading water, and we're not going to talk about it.
Is there a strong left-wing populism that can re-arise, or is that?
You know, it's funny because in theory, it really should be, possible, right? I mean, it does seem to me that capitalism has been a victim of its own success in some ways the last 30 years. If you look at what Boris is doing, it is essentially marrying a pretty social democratic economics at this point, to an extent it makes some of us a little queasy, with a just sort of a cultural belief in England, in Britain, in Britishness, in it's funny how you convey that or don't convey that. And he clearly is not, and one of the things I think that's really struck me a lot the last few years among my peers is I was kind of shocked at how unattached they were to the nation state. And I hadn't changed, I don't think, about that. I still think of the nation state. I'm still really proud of being born in that little island. I'm proud to become an immigrant in this great experiment. And then I really believe that they actually think that a European superstate is morally superior to the British nation state. And they actually don't really believe that a citizen of the United States should automatically, reflexively, have more rights than someone walking over the border from another country. And I just don't. Yeah. And I think that's why I can't be tolerated in those places, because those are now moral causes, and I'm immoral, bad person, bad.
So Hitchens is alive right now in 2021.
You groupie.
He I don't care. He's a contributor to the New York Times. He's a contributor to American Greatness. He's a Substack mogul. He's fully canceled and is now a beloved English teacher in Kansas City, or something else.
Probably something else.
Not a Substack mogul?
I think we could have talked him into it. Yeah, probably. Yeah. I don't think he could have survived anywhere else right now. But I just know that he would have so skewered Trump. It would have been just glorious.
Yeah.
But I have no question he'd be with us on this woke shit. I just become remarkably amused by the tenaciousness of reality. And our inability to really do much about it.
It can't be escaped, can't be negotiated away, unfortunately. No. But I mean, I feel like there's a theme in a lot of your work about, do you feel like specifically your family life when you were 8, do you feel like you, even now, do you feel like you're becoming more sensitive to the way that shaped you in a way that when you were 20, and I might be speaking for myself, I thought that I was like an Ayn Rand superhero who could escape any familial faults, and I could remake myself in the image of my heroes. And now that I'm approaching 40, I'm like, damn, man, like what happened at 6? It matters, man. Like those traumas haven't gone away.
They do matter.
You know?
When I did that retreat, and 10 days of silence, and then and around day 8, woof, what comes back is your childhood. I had a pretty traumatizing childhood. I'll be just completely frank about it, and of course that affects you. I think because I never had an Ayn Randian sense of my own superpowers. I assumed that I was going to hell most of the time
Catholic
in my life. Yes, it completely.
I'm pure American. Come on now. I'm Southern Californian. Like I just, I believe that I'm completely liberated from all constraints.
I come from generations of old men staring into the Atlantic Ocean from the coast of Western Ireland, grimly seeing another grey day that's going to get dark at 4 and then go back and do some scrolling very carefully. That's where I'm from.
The liberation that can be found from really coming to terms with death. And for you is about your writing, and you were like staring down death yourself, right? And not to be too grandiose, but a lot of what I've decided to do with my career is because it's like, why not take a shot, right? Why not take a shot? Because we all know that we're just heading to oblivion. But the difference between us is that I don't think there's anything there after we die. You do. I guess I want to know just how that flavors your conception of death, or if that
It flavors a lot.
yeah, obviously, yeah. It's an obvious question. It's a big question, and you have 2 minutes to answer it. Is that okay, Andrew? And then you can move on to your next thing.
As a boy, I'm made to go each week into a dark place and look at a tortured, dying man on a piece of wood, and think that is the perfection of humanity. That's the finest moment of a human being, that he gave his life in that torturous way. And so deep down, there is a sense of death always as a liberation, and as the means of our liberation too. Now, I don't have, and I wouldn't be telling the truth if I did, some clear idea of what is, what consciousness, what happens to consciousness after death, which is what we're talking about, really.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really impossible to believe that our consciousness, our precise individual, made in the image of God consciousness, endures in a different way, and that the promises that the Christian God has made to us are that all will be well.
And it's so predictable too. This thing about there not being any replacement for organized religion. Like I'm 24 years old and I have a signed copy of God Is Not Great. I'm new atheist. Like Christianity is some childish fairy tale. Now I'm 38, got a couple kids, and there's something bubbling up inside of me that wants to take them to Bible study. And I'm like, I don't even know where this is coming from. But you realize there is no replacement for what that institution does. Yoga's not going to do it. Facebook is not going to do it, right?
Well, it can distract you effectively from it.
But
That's its appeal.
it's not going to do what that does. No. It's not going to do what that does.
When my best friend was dying, I remember I was on bed. At some point, he was just in bed. He was immobile, and he was a bag of bones at that point. And I said to him, Pat, have you thought about death lately? I thought if he wasn't going to talk about it with anybody else, I was his Catholic friend.
Yeah.
And what do you think is going to happen, Pat? And that's a very real question, an outrageous question to ask a dying man. And he said to me, nothing. He said, nothing. I just see a big blackness coming towards me. And it was not my place to tell him otherwise at that point. He was the one looking at it. And it also reminds you that you always die alone.
That's the thing. That I don't think about very much. I think about death, like theoretically, as a liberatory experience. I don't really think about that.
Well, no one can take you across the bourne from whom no traveler returns.
I know.
No one can hold your hand in that. You are alone.